The quiet hum of a jet engine is a promise of destinations, reunions, and new beginnings. But on transatlantic air flight 117 from New York to London, that hum was drowned out by a single venomous whisper. "This isn't Coach Dare." The words were meant to cut, to diminish, to put a woman in her place. The speaker had no idea who she was talking to. She couldn't know that her target wasn't just another passenger. She was the one person on that plane with the absolute authority to silence that engine, shut down the flight, and bring the full, unyielding weight of federal aviation law down on them all. What follows isn't just a story of prejudice, it's a story of power, consequences, and the day one woman's quiet dignity grounded a 300-ton aircraft with a single phone call. Dr. Immani Carter believed in the quiet language of systems. As a senior field inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, specializing in aeronautical material science and structural integrity, her world was one of stress tolerances, metal fatigue, and the thousands of hidden variables that kept 1 million tons of aluminum and composite flying safely through the sky every single day. She saw the world not just as it was, but as a complex interplay of forces and potential failures. It was a perspective that made her exceptionally good at her job, and at times made the mundane world feel like a minefield of unseen risks. Today, however, she was supposed to be off the clock. Her trip to London was a mix of business and pleasure. A keynote address at the International Aviation Safety Symposium, followed by a week of exploring the city's museums, a well-earned respite from a grueling quarter of ramp checks and incident investigations. The first-class lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of curated calm. The lighting was soft, the armchairs were deep leather, and the air smelled of expensive coffee and faint perfume. Immani found a seat by the large windows overlooking the tarmac, the afternoon sun glinting off the wings of taxiing giants. She sipped her sparkling water, reviewing notes on her tablet. Her presentation was on microscopic stress fractures in carbon fiber fuselage panels, a topic most would find mind-numbingly dull. But to Immani, it was poetry. It was the story of how the smallest, most invisible flaw could, under the right pressure, unravel everything. She was dressed in what she considered comfortable travel wear, tailored black trousers, a silk shell top in a deep emerald green, and a pair of elegant but practical loafers. Her hair was styled in neat, intricate locks, some of which were pinned up to keep them from her face. She exuded an aura of composed intelligence. She was a woman comfortable in her own skin and confident in her space. This quiet confidence seemed to be an irritant to some. She first noticed them near the onyx-topped bar, a couple who seemed to command space, not through presence, but through sheer volume. The woman, probably in her late 50s, was draped in a beige cashmere shawl that looked aggressively expensive. Her face was a mask of taut surgical perfection, her blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of immovable waves. Her voice, however, was anything but perfect, carrying a sharp, entitled edge as she complained to the bartender about the brand of champagne being offered. "Honestly, Philip," she said to her husband, her voice slicing through the lounge's hushed atmosphere, "you'd think for what we pay, they could at least stock a decent vintage. This is practically Prosecco." Philip, a man whose tailored suit couldn't quite hide a soft paunch and a perpetually weary expression, just nodded placatingly. "I'll have a word with my concierge, Elodie Quinn. We'll sort it for the return flight." Elodie Quinn. Immani didn't know her name yet, but she recognized the type instantly. She had encountered them countless times in her life, and career people who moved through the world as if it were their personal property, a stage set for their comfort and convenience, with everyone else cast as background extras. Immani paid them little mind, returning to her notes. The dance of aircraft outside was far more interesting. She watched a Boeing 777, the same model as her flight, being loaded with cargo containers, each one a testament to the complex logistical ballet required for modern air travel. She thought about the latches on those cargo doors, the hydraulic actuators, the maintenance logs she'd reviewed just last week for a different airline. Her mind was always working, always assessing. The boarding call for Tay 117 to London. Heathrow finally came. As the passengers in the lounge began to gather their things, Immani noticed the Quinn couple again. Philip was on his phone, speaking in loud, important tones about mergers and acquisitions, while Elodie Quinn directed a porter with the imperious air of a monarch commanding her court. They had an obscene amount of luggage for 2 people, even for first class. Immani finished her water, packed her tablet into a leather briefcase, and joined the end of the short priority boarding line. She preferred to be one of the last to board, minimizing her time in the confined space of the cabin. She presented her boarding pass, seat 2A, a window seat in the first row, to the gate agent, who gave her a warm, professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Carter. Hope you have a wonderful flight." "Thank you," Immani replied, her own smile genuine. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she found her path blocked. Elodie Quinn. Quinn had stopped dead in the middle of the corridor, fussing with her large, hard-shell carry-on, a gleaming silver monstrosity that looked perilously close to the maximum size limit. "Philip, this handle is sticking," she snapped, wrestling with the telescopic handle. "I told you we should have bought the titanium model. Just jiggle it," Elodie Philip mumbled, still glued to his phone. Immani waited patiently for a moment, then said, "Excuse me." Elodie Quinn glanced back, her eyes sweeping over Immani from head to toe. It was a look Immani knew well. It wasn't just a glance, it was an appraisal, a categorization, a judgment. In a fraction of a second, Elodie Quinn's brain processed Immani's dark skin, her locks, and her simple, elegant attire, and arrived at a swift, unshakable conclusion. A faint, condescending smile touched Elodie Quinn's lips. She didn't move. She simply turned back to her bag, dismissing Immani as if she were a piece of furniture. Immani felt the familiar hot prickle of anger, but she immediately encased it in ice. Getting angry was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was what they expected, what they wanted. Instead, she took a breath and repeated more firmly this time, "Excuse me, I need to get by." Philip, finally noticing the hold-up, ended his call. All right. Let's move along." He gave the bag a hard yank. The handle popped up, and they proceeded into the aircraft. Immani followed the pleasant pre-flight feeling, now replaced by a familiar wariness. She entered the cabin and turned left into the exclusive first-class section, a pod-like arrangement of spacious seats. Her seat 2A was directly behind 1A. She saw Philip settling into 1B across the aisle. Elodie Quinn was standing by seat 1A, directing her husband on where to stow her mountain of personal items. Immani moved past them toward her pod. As she began to place her briefcase under the seat in front of her, she heard the voice again, this time a low, conspiratorial whisper, but loud enough for her to hear clearly. It was Elodie Quinn, leaning across the aisle to her husband. "I don't know what's happening with this airline," she murmured with a disdainful glance in Immani's direction. "They're letting just anyone up here now. It's supposed to be exclusive." Philip shushed her, looking uncomfortable. But Elodie Quinn was just getting warmed up. Immani ignored her, focusing on settling in. She took off her loafers and slipped on the complimentary airline socks. She arranged her neck pillow. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. She would be an island of calm. But Elodie Quinn wasn't done. She watched as Immani settled into the plush seat, her expression souring further. It was as if Immani's very presence was a personal offense, a stain on her luxurious experience. A flight attendant, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, came by. "Welcome aboard, Mum. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? We have champagne orange juice or water. I'll have a water with lemon, please," Immani said warmly. As Brenda turned to get the drink, Elodie Quinn stood up, blocking the aisle. She looked directly at Immani, her face a mask of patronizing disbelief. Then she uttered the words that would alter the course of the entire day, words dripping with the poison of prejudice. "I think you might be confused," Elodie Quinn said, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes like chips of ice. "This is the first-class cabin." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane. "This isn't coach, dear." The cabin for a moment went silent. The other first-class passengers pretended not to hear, suddenly fascinated by their safety cards. Brenda, the flight attendant, froze mid-step. Philip's face flushed a deep, mottled red. Immani looked up from her seat, her gaze meeting Elodie Quinn's. The ice in her own veins was now a glacier. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She held Elodie Quinn's stare and let the silence stretch, becoming a weapon in itself. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. Finally, Immani spoke her voice, low calm and dangerously precise. "I'm in seat 2A, she said, her tone flat and final. "I suggest you find yours." The confrontation was over before it began, but the air was now charged, humming with a tension far more palpable than the gentle vibration of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit. Elodie Quinn flustered at being challenged, huffed, and returned to her seat. But she had lit a fuse, and she had no idea that the woman she had just insulted was an expert in explosions. The pre-departure rituals of the first-class cabin began a forced pantomime of normalcy over the thick layer of tension Elodie Quinn had created. Hot towels were distributed, champagne flutes clinked. But Immani's senses were now on high alert. The insult itself was a familiar sting, a wound she had learned to dress and ignore over a lifetime of similar cuts. But the sheer audacity, the public nature of it, had flipped a switch in her mind. It was no longer just a personal slight. It was a disruption. And Dr. Immani Carter was a professional disruptor of a very specific kind. Her focus shifted from Elodie Quinn, the bigot, to Elodie Quinn, the passenger, a variable in a complex safety equation. And that's when she noticed the bag again, the gleaming silver carry-on. As the last of the passengers boarded, Brenda, the flight attendant, began her final checks, her smile looking strained. She approached the Quinn suite. "Mr. and Mrs. Quinn," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I'm afraid that roller bag is too large for the overhead compartment. The door won't close properly. I'll need to have it gate-checked." Elodie Quinn scoffed, as if Brenda had suggested she fly on the wing. "Absolutely not. This bag is not leaving my sight. It has my medications in it. And besides, it's a standard carry-on. It's a hard shell case, Mom, and it exceeds our size or dimensions for this aircraft's cabin," Brenda insisted, gesturing to a small plaque on the bin door, indicating maximum size. "It's a safety issue. If it doesn't fit securely, it can become a projectile during turbulence." Immani listened intently. Brenda was correct. FAA regulations were crystal clear on stowage. An item that cannot be safely secured in an overhead bin or under a seat must be checked. There was no grey area. "This is absurd," Elodie Quinn snapped, her voice rising. "Philip, do something." Philip, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. He pulled out a black metallic card from his wallet and flashed it at Brenda. "Perhaps you don't realize," he said, his voice low and menacing, "but we are transatlantic Apex tier members. My wife's bag flies where she wants it to fly. I suggest you find a way to make it fit, or I'll be having a conversation with your head of customer relations before we even take off." Brenda paled. The Apex tier card was the airline's equivalent of a royal seal reserved for its highest spending, most influential clients. A complaint from a member like Philip Quinn could mean a reprimand, a lost promotion, or even her job. Immani could see the conflict warring on the flight attendant's face, professional duty versus professional survival. Brenda's resolve crumbled. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Let me just see if I can rearrange some things." She opened the bin above the Quins seats, which was already full with their other coats and bags. She tried to shift items around, but it was clear the silver case was simply too wide and too thick. "Just push it," Elodie Quinn ordered, her patience gone. "It'll go." Brenda, looking miserable, tried to force the bag into the space. It wouldn't budge. "Oh, for heaven's sake, give it here," Elodie Quinn said. She snatched the bag, positioned it, and with a grunt of effort, slammed it into the compartment. Philip stood up to help, and together they forced the bulging bin door closed. As the latch clicked shut under immense pressure, Immani heard it. It wasn't a loud noise. To most, it would have been lost in the cabin's ambient noise, but to her it was as loud as a gunshot. It was a sharp, distinct crack. Not the sound of plastic bending, not the thud of luggage shifting. It was the sickening high-frequency report of composite material fracturing under stress. Immani's blood ran cold. Her mind, a library of material failure data, instantly pulled up the schematics for the Boeing 777's overhead bin assembly. She knew it wasn't just a simple plastic box. It was a complex load-bearing structure designed to withstand immense G-forces. It was made of a honeycomb composite core, sandwiched between layers of carbon fiber and phenolic resin. Strong, lightweight, but brittle when subjected to the wrong kind of force. A fracture could compromise its ability to hold its designated weight limit, hundreds of pounds, during severe turbulence. A failing bin mid-flight could collapse. It could spill its contents onto passengers, causing serious injury. In a worst-case scenario, the entire assembly could detach from the fuselage ceiling. It wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a critical safety component. The insult was forgotten. This was now a professional matter, a potentially catastrophic one. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. She walked the few steps to where Brenda was now trying to regain her composure. "Excuse me," Immani said, her voice calm and level. "I heard a crack when that door was forced shut. You need to open that bin and inspect the latch and the housing." Brenda looked at her, startled. "Ma'am, it's fine. It's closed now." "It was forced shut under extreme pressure," Immani reiterated. "The structural integrity of the compartment may be compromised. I need you to open it." Elodie Quinn, who had been watching with a smirk of triumph, now turned her fury on Immani. "Oh, will you just stop? You're not the pilot. You're not in charge. You were told to mind your own business. Sit down and stop making trouble." Immani ignored her completely, keeping her eyes fixed on Brenda. "Your airline's operations manual and FAA regulations require you to ensure all compartments are safely secured. You cannot determine that without an inspection. Open the bin." The first officer, a young cocksure man named Brent Peterson, with slicked back hair and an arrogant swagger, emerged from the cockpit, having heard the commotion. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his tone already dismissive. Brenda explained the situation falteringly. "This passenger," she said, gesturing to Immani, "is insisting we reopen the bin. Mrs. Quinn's bag was a tight fit, but it's secure." Brent glanced at Immani, his eyes mirroring the same dismissive appraisal Elodie Quinn had given her. A black woman in locks, making technical demands. His mind, like Elodie Quinn's, had already categorized and dismissed her. "Ma'am, the door is closed, the light is green. We're on schedule. Please return to your seat so we can get underway," he said. as if speaking to a child. First Officer Immani said, her voice hardening, losing its gentle edge and taking on the unmistakable ring of authority. "I'm a senior FAA inspector. My name is Dr. Immani Carter, badge number 724-1 Alpha. I am telling you, not asking you, that I heard a sound consistent with a composite stress fracture. Under Federal Aviation Regulation, Part 121, you are obligated to investigate a credible report of a potential safety hazard from a crew member or a qualified industry professional. That's me. So I'll say it one more time. Open. The bin." The cockpit door opened again, and the captain, a veteran with silver hair and weary eyes named Dennis O'Malley, stepped out. He surveyed the scene, his expression one of deep exhaustion. He'd seen 1,000 petty disputes in his 40 years of flying. "Brent, what's going on?" he asked. Captain Brent said with a roll of his eyes, "This passenger is claiming a bin is broken, because she heard a noise." The Quinn in 1A and B confirmed it's fine. "She's delaying our departure." Captain O'Malley looked at Immani. She stood her ground, her expression unyielding. He then looked at Philip Quinn, who simply gave a slight shake of his head, a silent signal to dismiss the complaint. The captain had a choice: delay the flight and anger a VVIP passenger over a noise, or trust his junior officer and push back from the gate. He was tired. He had a schedule to keep. He made the wrong choice. "Ma'am," Captain O'Malley said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "I appreciate your concern, but my first officer and the lead flight attendant have assessed the situation. The bin is secure. We are not going to delay an international flight for this. Please return to your seat. That's an order from the captain." Immani stared at him. She had given them every chance. She had stated her credentials. She had cited the regulations. She had been polite, then firm, then authoritative. She had followed every step of the professional protocol, and at every turn she was dismissed. Dismissed by the passenger's prejudice, the flight attendant's fear, the first officer's arrogance, and the captain's fatigue. They thought this was the end of it. They thought she would retreat to her seat defeated. They had no idea who they were dealing with. She held Captain O'Malley's gaze for a long moment. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, Captain," she said, her voice eerily calm. "As you wish." She turned, walked back to her seat and sat down. Elodie Quinn shot her a triumphant, venomous smirk. Brent gave a self-satisfied nod and disappeared back into the cockpit. Captain O'Malley followed him. The jet bridge began to pull away from the aircraft. The main cabin door was sealed with a heavy thud. The engines began to spool up, their deep hum vibrating through the floor. Immani calmly reached into her briefcase and pulled out her phone. She looked out the window at the ground crew dispersing. She scrolled through her contacts to a number that wasn't in any public directory. A number that bypassed switchboards and secretaries. A number that led directly to the FAA's Northeast Regional Operations Center duty officer. She pressed the call button. Elodie Quinn watched her, a curious, mocking expression on her face. Who could she possibly be calling? Her lawyer, a voice, answered on the other end, crisp and professional. "Rock, this is Matthews." Immani looked at the flight number on her ticket, then at the tail number of the aircraft visible from her window. She spoke with quiet, chilling clarity. "This is Inspector Immani Carter, badge 741 Alpha. I'm on board Transatlantic Air Flight 117 aircraft registration, November 773 Tango, Alpha, currently at gate C62 at JFK. I am exercising my authority under FAR 199-57. I am grounding this aircraft effective immediately. There is a credible, uninspected threat to structural airworthiness in the cabin. Inform JFK Tower to rescind their takeoff clearance and order the aircraft back to the gate. I want a full ground crew and an airworthiness directive team to meet us. Acknowledge." There was a half-second pause on the other end, followed by a firm, acknowledged inspector, ordering return to gate now. Stand by. Immani disconnected the call and placed her phone on the armrest. She looked out the window as the engines, which had been building to a roar, suddenly spooled down into a whine. The forward motion of the aircraft ceased. A confused murmur rippled through the cabin. Up in the cockpit, Immani could imagine the frantic chatter that had just erupted from the radio. Tower 117, be advised, your takeoff clearance is cancelled. Return to the gate. I repeat, return to the gate. Ground control has an operational directive for you. Elodie Quin's smirk had vanished, replaced by a frown of confusion. What's going on? She demanded, to no one in particular. A few moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, strained and bewildered. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain O'Malley. It appears there's been some sort of directive from air traffic control. We are being ordered back to the gate. We don't have any further information at this time, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. The plane began a slow, clumsy reverse, the pushback tug re-engaging to nudge it back into its slot. Elodie Quin was furious. This is ridiculous. I have a dinner reservation in Mayfair. Philip, call someone. But Immani wasn't looking at Elodie Quin. She was looking at the cockpit door. She knew it would open any second. And it did. Captain O'Malley emerged, his face ashen. His eyes scanned the first-class cabin and locked onto Immani, who was sitting perfectly still watching him. This time there was no weariness or condescension in his expression. There was only dawning, horrified comprehension. He walked slowly down the aisle and stopped beside her seat. "Dr. Carter," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That was you?" Immani met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. "I told you, Captain. There's a potential safety hazard. You chose to ignore it. So I escalated it to a level you couldn't ignore." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Now, when we get to the gate, you will open the main cabin door, and you will wait for my team. Your flight is grounded." The atmosphere inside Flight 117 transformed. The initial confusion curdled into frustration, and then outright anger, as the minutes ticked by. The aircraft was now stationary at the gate engines, silent, a metal tomb sealed against the outside world. The passengers in economy and business class were restless, their murmurs growing louder. But in the first-class cabin, the silence was a taut wire vibrating with the unspoken drama that had just unfolded. All eyes were on Immani. Passengers who had previously ignored her were now staring, trying to piece together the unbelievable sequence of events. They had seen the argument, heard the captain's dismissal, and then witnessed the woman at the center of it all make a single phone call that brought the entire operation to a screeching halt. Power had shifted in a way that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Elodie Quin was practically vibrating with rage. Her face, a carefully constructed facade of aristocratic calm, was crumbling. "This is your fault," she hissed at Immani, her voice a venomous stage whisper. "You have ruined everything. Who in God's name do you think you are?" Before Immani could respond, Captain O'Malley, who was still standing, pale and shaken beside her, answered for her. "She's the FAA, Mrs. Quin," he said, his voice flat with defeat. "She's the one person on this plane who has more authority than I do, and she just used it." The color drained from Elodie Quin's face. The FAA, the faceless bureaucratic entity that held the power of life and death over airlines. It wasn't some troublemaker, some disgruntled passenger. It was the government. Her husband, Philip, who had been frantically and uselessly trying to call his contacts, slowly lowered his phone, a look of profound dread dawning on his face. He understood what his wife did not, They had not just insulted a woman. They had provoked a regulator. The heavy clank of the jet bridge reconnecting to the aircraft door echoed through the cabin. A moment later, the door was opened, not by the flight crew, but from the outside. 2 uniformed Port Authority officers stepped on board, followed by a man in a simple navy blue polo shirt with a small embroidered FAA logo on the breast. He was Mark Coleman, the head of the JFK Airworthiness Directive Team and a colleague of Immani's. He was bald-built like a fire plug and had an expression that suggested he had zero patience for nonsense. He spotted Immani immediately. "Dr. Carter," he said, with a nod of professional respect. "We got your call. What's the situation?" Immani stood. "Mark, thank you for the quick response. The issue is a potential structural failure in the overhead bin at seat 1AB. She pointed. The bin door was forced shut on an oversized bag against the explicit advice of the cabin crew. I heard a sound consistent with a composite fracture. The flight crew refused to conduct a manual inspection." Mark Coleman's eyes narrowed. He looked from the bin to Captain O'Malley, then to the First Officer Brent, who had emerged from the cockpit looking like a ghost. Mark didn't need to say a word. His expression conveyed the depth of trouble the flight crew was now in. "Right," Mark said. "We're taking over. This aircraft is now under FAA control. No one leaves until cleared by me." He turned to one of the Port Authority officers. "Get the passengers off. Reschedule them. But get me the names and contact information of everyone in this first-class cabin. They're all witnesses." He then looked directly at Philip and Elodie Quinn, especially them. He turned to his team, who were now filing onto the plane with toolkits and inspection cameras. "I want that bin opened and photographed before anything is touched. Then I want the entire assembly removed and sent to the lab at LaGuardia. Full delamination scan and stress analysis." The deplaning process was an exercise in organized chaos. The economy passengers, bewildered and furious about the delay, were simply told the flight was cancelled due to a technical issue. But the first-class passengers knew better. As they filed out, they shot glances at Immani, a mixture of awe and fear in their eyes. Elodie Quinn and Philip were the last to be escorted off. As she passed Immani, Elodie Quinn, her face a mask of pure hatred, stopped. "You will regret this," she seethed, her voice low and trembling. "My husband is Philip Quinn. You have no idea the mistake you've just made." Immani simply looked at her, her expression unchanged. "The mistake was made when you valued your luggage over the safety of 300 people, Mrs. Quinn. The rest of this is just the consequence." Philip grabbed his wife's arm and pulled her away, his face clammy with sweat. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that they were in catastrophic trouble. With the cabin cleared, the scene transformed from a luxury travel space into a sterile investigation site. Mark's team worked with quiet efficiency. They carefully opened the bin door. The moment the latch was released, the door no longer held in place by its structural integrity, sagged visibly on one hinge. Mark shone a high-intensity flashlight on the latch mechanism. And there it was. A hairline fracture spiderwebbing out from the primary attachment point of the latch housing. It was exactly what Immani had suspected, but worse. The crack ran deep into the main composite panel of the bin's frame. "Bingo," Mark said grimly. He took a series of high-resolution photos. "Dr. Carter, your ears are as good as our ultrasound equipment." "It was the sound it made," Immani said, pointing. "The high-frequency pitch. Phenolic resins crack like that when they're hit with a sudden high-torsion force. They forced the door against the frame, putting all the pressure right on that latch point. It was never designed to take a load like that." While the technicians began the painstaking process of removing the entire overhead bin, Mark Coleman turned to the flight crew, who were huddled together like defendants awaiting a verdict. Captain O'Malley, First Officer Peterson, Flight Attendant Jenkins. Mark began, his voice devoid of warmth. I need your statements. Now. In separate rooms. He pointed to Captain O'Malley. Captain, you had a credentialed FAA inspector on your flight report, a credible safety threat. Why did you ignore it? Captain O'Malley swallowed hard. There was no good answer. I made a judgment call. I had an apex tier passenger. There was pressure. I didn't see any visible damage. You didn't look for any visible damage? Mark corrected him, his voice sharp as glass. You took the word of the passenger who caused the problem, and your junior officer over a federal inspector. Your judgment call nearly sent this aircraft into the sky with a compromised primary cabin structure. He then turned his steely gaze to Brent. First Officer Peterson. Dr. Carter states she identified herself and her authority to you. Is this correct? Brent, whose earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, could only nod mutely. And you dismissed her concerns. I thought she was just an angry passenger, Brent stammered, because she's a black woman. The question hung in the air, brutal and direct. No, of course not. Brent protested too quickly. Mark just stared at him, letting the lie suffocate in the silence. Your actions and inactions are now part of a federal investigation. You will all be grounded, pending a full review. Surrender your licenses and credentials. He finally looked at Brenda, the flight attendant, whose eyes were filled with tears. Her expression was not one of defiance, but of pure terror. Ms. Jenkins, Mark said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. I saw the report from the gate agent. You initially tried to have the bag checked correctly, identifying it as oversized. Is that right? Brenda nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, sir. But Mr. Quinn, he showed me his Apex card. He threatened to call my supervisor. I was scared. They tell us to do everything we can to accommodate Apex members. We get memos about it. The Apex experience, they call it. Immani and Mark exchanged a look. This was the heart of it, the systemic rot. It wasn't just one arrogant passenger or one weary captain. It was a corporate culture that prioritized the whims of the wealthy over its own safety protocols. Brenda's fear was a symptom of a much larger disease. I see, Mark said. He made a note on his tablet. Your statement will be very important, Ms. Jenkins. The investigation on the plane would last for hours. The bin was carefully crated up and taken away. Every adjacent panel was inspected. The maintenance logs for the entire aircraft were digitally seized. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were pulled. Immani stood by a silent observer as the system she represented took over. She felt no triumph, no glee. She felt a profound sense of melancholy. This entire massive, expensive, and career-ending disruption had started with a simple, ugly act of prejudice. Elodie Quinn, in her attempt to belittle and exclude one black woman, had inadvertently exposed the dangerous weaknesses in an entire airline's culture. She had told Immani, "This isn't Coach." She was right. This was now a federal crime scene, and the investigation was just beginning. It would soon spread far beyond Gate C-62, and the consequences would be more devastating than anyone on that plane could possibly imagine. The grounding of TAA-117 was not a quiet affair. In the hyper-connected world of aviation, news travels at the speed of light. By the time Immani was signing her preliminary report in the FAA's Stark field office at JFK, the story was already a wildfire. It had everything a luxury international flight, a dramatic last-minute grounding, and a mysterious security threat. Aviation bloggers and industry journalists sniffing a major story began digging. An anonymous source within the Port Authority, eager for a scoop, leaked a crucial detail: the grounding was initiated, not by the crew or the airline, but by a passenger who was, in fact, a high-ranking FAA inspector. The narrative began to take shape. Within hours, another leak, likely from a disgruntled transatlantic employee furious at the flight crew's incompetence, added the explosive context. The inspector, a black woman, had been verbally harassed by an entitled white passenger in first class, and the crew had sided with the aggressor. The story exploded online. "A flying while black" and "Twatters, this isn't coach" started trending. The incident became a flashpoint, a perfect, infuriating encapsulation of casual racism, classism, and corporate cowardice. Immani, fiercely private, refused all media requests directing them to the FAA's Public Affairs Office. Her job was not to be a celebrity. It was to ensure the integrity of the investigation. And that investigation was now her sole focus. The initial lab report on the damaged overhead bin came back within 48 hours, and it was damning. Mark Coleman called Immani as soon as he got it. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice grim. The fracture was even worse than we thought. The main support spar inside the panel was cracked through. The lab ran a simulation. At 2.5 Gs, the kind of force you'd get in moderate to severe turbulence, the entire bin assembly would have failed. It would have detached from the ceiling. He paused. The weight listed on the manifest for that bin's contents, including the Quinn other junk, was 140 pounds. It would have come down on the passengers in row 2. On you. Immani felt a chill despite the warmth of her office. The abstract risk had become a concrete, terrifying reality. "But that's not the worst part," Mark continued. "The reason it failed so spectacularly wasn't just the force from the door. Our team found evidence of pre-existing material fatigue, microfractures around the latch housing. The maintenance logs for this aircraft show that the bin door was reported as sticky 3 times in the last 6 months. The fix every time was logged as lubricated hinge. They never did a structural check. They just oiled the damn thing and sent it back into service. This was the smoking gun. It elevated the incident from a single act of passenger misconduct to a case of systemic negligence on the part of Transatlantic Air. The airline hadn't just been cowed by a VVIP, they had been actively cutting corners on maintenance for months. The investigation, with Immani now leading the special task force, widened its scope dramatically. It was no longer about one bin on one plane. It was about Transatlantic Air's entire fleet of Boeing 777s. A fleet-wide airworthiness directive was issued, mandating the immediate inspection of every overhead bin assembly of the same type. The results were catastrophic for the airline. Of the 58 aircraft they operated in that class, 14 of them, nearly a quarter of the fleet, were found to have similar unreported or improperly addressed maintenance issues. Sticky latches, loose fittings, and in 3 other cases, nascent stress fractures. Transatlantic Air was forced to ground a significant portion of its long-haul fleet, causing chaos in its global operations. Flights were cancelled by the hundreds. The stock price, which had already dipped after the initial incident, began to plummet. The board went into crisis mode, and the COO, a slick executive named Lawrence Powell, was called to Washington to testify before a furious Congressional Oversight Committee. Meanwhile, the human drama continued to unfold. Captain O'Malley and First Officer Brent were officially suspended without pay, their careers effectively over. O'Malley, facing the loss of his pension and the shame of ending a 40-year career in disgrace, chose to cooperate fully. He gave a deposition detailing the intense corporate pressure to appease Apex tier members, providing emails and internal memos that substantiated Brenda's claims. Brent Peterson, the arrogant first officer, was not so lucky. His dismissive attitude during the incident, combined with his flimsy denial of racial bias, made him a pariah. The pilots' union refused to represent him with any real vigor, seeing him as a liability. He was fired, and with a federal investigation blacklisting him, he would likely never fly a commercial airliner again. Brenda Jenkins, the flight attendant, became an unlikely hero. Her testimony, backed by the evidence Immani's team uncovered, exposed the toxic "customer is always right" culture that had jeopardized safety. She was initially placed on leave, but with union backing and public support, she was reinstated. More importantly, she became a powerful advocate for cabin crew rights, speaking out about the impossible position airline staff are put in when forced to choose between safety protocols and the demands of powerful passengers. And then there were the Quinn. The media, unable to get to Immani, turned their full, unrelenting attention on Elodie Quinn and Philip. They were identified as the passengers at the center of the scandal. Photos of their opulent lifestyle were splashed across tabloids and news sites, juxtaposed with the details of Elodie Quinn's racist comment and their reckless endangerment of the flight. Elodie Quinn became a national symbol of entitlement, a Karen of the highest order. They were hounded by reporters, publicly shamed online, and ostracized from their wealthy social circles, who wanted nothing to do with the toxic PR fallout. But for Philip Quinn, the public humiliation was just the beginning. The real karma was far more insidious, and was about to strike at the heart of his empire. Philip was the CEO of Quinn Global Logistics DGL, a massive freight and shipping company. A significant portion of DGL's business involved air cargo, transporting goods on commercial and cargo planes. Their biggest client by far was the US government, with lucrative contracts to transport military and federal supplies. As part of her expanding investigation into transatlantic air, Immani's team began looking into their relationships with major partners. When they saw the name Quinn Global Logistics in the cargo manifests, a red flag went up. Mark Immani said, during a team meeting, if transatlantic was cutting corners on passenger safety to save a buck, what are the chances they were doing the same with their cargo division? It was a logical leap. An anonymous tip sent to the FAA's fraud hotline by the same disgruntled TAA employee who had leaked the initial story gave them the perfect place to start. The tip alleged that DGL often declared its cargo shipments as lighter than they actually were to get cheaper rates from transatlantic, and that TAA ground crews were encouraged to look the other way, especially for a partner as big as DGL. Overweight cargo is one of the most dangerous invisible threats in aviation. It throws off the aircraft's weight and balance calculations, affecting takeoff performance, fuel consumption, and structural stress. It was a scandal waiting to happen. Immani's task force requested the full cargo manifests and weight records for all DGL shipments with transatlantic over the past 2 years. At the same time, they cross-referenced the data with records from DGL's own internal logistics software, which they subpoenaed. The discrepancy was staggering. Systematically for years, DGL had been underreporting the weight of its shipments by an average of 15 to 20%. It was a deliberate, calculated fraud designed to save millions of dollars in shipping costs. Philip Quinn, in his quest for profit, had been knowingly jeopardizing the safety of hundreds of flights. The incident his wife had caused was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of the same rotten, reckless culture that defined their entire existence. The FAA investigation immediately became a multi-agency federal case. The Department of Transportation, the Department of Justice, and most ominously for Philip Quinn, the Internal Revenue Service, were brought in. If he was defrauding his shipping partners, there was a very high chance he was also defrauding the US government on his taxes. The karma that was coming for Philip Quinn wasn't just going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be a meteor strike. And it was all triggered because his wife couldn't stand the sight of a black woman sitting in a first-class seat. The single crack in the overhead bin had exposed a universe of fractures in their lives, and the entire structure was about to come crashing down. The fall of the House of Quinn was not swift, but it was total. It was a slow, grinding demolition carried out by the methodical and emotionless machinery of federal law. The DOJ unsealed a 47-count indictment against Philip Quinn and 3 other senior executives at Quinn Global Logistics. The charges included wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and violations of the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act for mislabeling and underreporting the weight of sensitive cargo. The IRS, in a separate action, filed charges for tax evasion, accusing him of using a web of offshore accounts to hide the profits from his fraudulent shipping schemes. The day the indictment came down, federal agents raided the DGL headquarters in Connecticut and Philip and Elodie Quins' sprawling mansion in Greenwich. They walked out with boxes of documents, computers, and a collection of illegally acquired antiquities Philip had smuggled into the country in mislabeled cargo containers. The man who had flashed his VVIP card to intimidate a flight attendant was now just another defendant in an ill-fitting suit doing a perp walk in front of a ravenous press corps. His assets were frozen. The DGL board fired him, the company facing crippling fines and the loss of its government contracts filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy within a month. The Quinn empire, built on a foundation of arrogance and deceit, had crumbled to dust. Elodie Quinn's fate was equally grim, though less criminal. The public shaming was relentless. She was disinvited from every charity board, blacklisted from every social club. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Faced with financial ruin and public disgrace, she filed for divorce, trying to distance herself from Philip's crimes. But the court, citing her complicity and lavish spending of the fraud-derived income, awarded her a fraction of what she sought. The woman who couldn't tolerate the thought of flying with coach people found herself forced to sell her mansion, her jewelry, and her cashmere shawls just to cover her legal fees. She ended up living in a modest condo in Florida, a pariah haunted by a single hateful sentence. The karma for transatlantic air was just as severe. The FAA's final report was a brutal indictment of their corporate culture. It detailed the systemic maintenance failures, the dangerous pressure placed on crew members and a management team that had prioritized profit over safety at every turn. The airline was hit with the largest fine in the agency's history, $1.2 billion. They were forced into a court-monitored restructuring plan that required a complete overhaul of their maintenance division and a top-to-bottom retraining of all flight and cabin crew on safety protocols and non-discrimination policies. The CEO, Lawrence Powell, was ousted, and several other high-level executives faced charges for their role in covering up the maintenance lapses. The airline would survive, but as a shadow of its former self, a permanent cautionary tale in the industry. And in the middle of this vast, sprawling wreckage, Dr. Immani Carter continued her work. She never spoke publicly about the Quins or the personal nature of the incident. When asked by colleagues, she would simply say, "My job is to identify points of failure in a system." That day, the system had several. Her stoicism and unwavering professionalism became legendary within the FAA. She was promoted to Deputy Director of the Office of Aviation Safety. She used her new position to champion what she called the human factor in safety culture. She spearheaded new training programs designed to empower crew members like Brenda Jenkins, giving them stronger protections and clearer protocols for reporting safety concerns without fear of reprisal from passengers or management. She argued that a flight is only as safe as its most intimidated crew member. Her work on the DGL case also led to sweeping changes in air cargo regulations, implementing a system of randomized automated weight checks and digital cross-referencing to prevent the kind of fraud Philip Quinn had perpetrated. One afternoon, about a year after the grounding of Flight 117, Immani was in her Washington, D.C. office reviewing a proposal for a new type of fuselage composite. Her assistant buzzed her. "Ma'am, there's a Brenda Jenkins here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd know who she is." Immani smiled. "Send her in." Brenda walked in, no longer looking like the harried, terrified flight attendant from that day. She was dressed in a smart business suit, her face confident and composed. She was now a senior representative for the Flight Attendants Union. "Dr. Carter," Brenda began, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you're busy. I never had the chance to properly thank you." "You have nothing to thank me for," Brenda Immani said, warmly gesturing for her to sit. "You were the first one to do the right thing. You tried to stop them. But I gave in," Brenda said, shaking her head. "I was scared. You weren't. You didn't back down. You changed everything. Not just for me. I have a new career now fighting for my colleagues, but for everyone. The Carter Rule, they call it in training now. It's the protocol for what to do when a crew member's safety decision is challenged by a passenger, no matter who they are." Immani was taken aback. She hadn't heard that. "You showed us all," Brenda continued, her eyes shining, "that integrity can't be overruled, that a single person standing firm on what is right is more powerful than a VVIP card or a corporate bully. What you did, it gave thousands of us our courage back." They talked for nearly an hour. Brenda told her about the changes at the new transatlantic air, about the sense of empowerment the crews now felt. Immani listened, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over her. The consequences of that day had been immense. Fortunes were lost, careers ended, companies broken. But here in her office was the other side of the equation. A woman who had found her voice, a system that was being forced to become safer, more just. The microscopic stress fracture in the overhead bin had led to a catastrophic failure, but from that failure, something stronger was being built. As Brenda left, Immani walked to the window of her office, which overlooked the bustling city. She thought back to that moment on the plane, the venom in Elodie Quinn's voice, the dismissiveness in the captain's eyes. She had faced a choice: absorb the insult and endure the risk, or unleash the full weight of her authority. She had chosen the latter, not out of anger or revenge, but out of a deep, unshakable commitment to the principles she had built her life on. The world was a complex system of forces, and sometimes, to prevent a catastrophic collapse, you had to be willing to ground the whole damn thing. You had to be willing to be the consequence. And as she looked out at the sky filled with aircraft flying under safer rules, she knew she had made the right call. The karma hadn't been hers to deliver. It had been a latent force within the system itself, a reckoning waiting for a catalyst. All she had to do was make a single simple phone call and let gravity do the rest. So what's the real takeaway from the day Dr. Immani Carter grounded Flight 117? This story, rooted in a real-life type of incident we see all too often, isn't just about a satisfying takedown of a Karen. It's a powerful reminder that prejudice and arrogance often blind people to the quiet competence and authority of others. Elodie Quinn. Quinn and the flight crew made a critical mistake. They judged a book by its cover and assumed the person they were dismissing had no power. They couldn't have been more wrong. This is a testament to the fact that integrity and professionalism are the ultimate authority. Dr. Carter didn't need to scream or cause a scene. Her power was in her knowledge, her calmness, and the badge she had earned. It's a story about how one person's refusal to be belittled can expose systemic rot, proving that true consequences are rarely personal. They are the natural outcome of a broken system finally being held to account. What do you think? Was the karma too harsh, or was it exactly what they deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story of justice as compelling as we did, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for more true life drama.